Hi everybody, welcome back for session number 4 on the Lightroom training together with Joburg Photowalkers. Glad you all could join. As in previous sessions, you're welcome to pop any questions in the chat on YouTube. So the live chat is going and I will be watching it for any questions, any editing related questions, any Lightroom related questions. Welcome. I see more people joining. Yeah, just pop your question in the chat. I'm going to keep an eye on it as we go, and we'll carry on from there. So today's session, just a quick overview. In previous sessions, we did workflow. We also looked at the basic or the light panel in Lightroom. So that's where we adjust things like overall exposure, darker areas, lighter areas, the tones of your image. Now, together with that is the panel we're going to be looking at today. These two panels are basically the most important panels in Lightroom, I would say, for getting good edits. And today is the color panel. So if you open up your Lightroom, you'll see the very first panel in Lightroom is your basic or your light panel. And then the very next one is colors. So first off, you do things like adjust your tones and your exposure, and once that's done, you would go over to color correction and adjust colors in ways either for fixing things. Maybe you got something wrong and the colors are looking wrong, so the color panel is where you can fix things when it comes to colors. But the color panel is also where a lot of the creativity when editing happens. So if you're editing something for a specific mood or a specific look, or you need to match a look from a client, all these different reasons, you might then hop into your color panel, and that's where a lot of customization happens. Now, personally, I love black and white photography a lot. I shoot a lot of monochrome images, and then obviously you would just spend your time mostly in the light panel or the basic panel because you're adjusting tones mostly in a black and white image. With color images, obviously then the color panel becomes just as important, because that tells a big part of the story of your image is usually built into the colors and how you use colors, and for creative effect or for fixing things, especially things like skin tones are really important when it comes to portraits. So you need to know all the different tools in the color panel to be able to fix things when people are looking a bit sickly, a little bit blue, a little bit green, a little bit purple. These things happen and we need to know how to fix them when it comes to editing. Hi everybody. See more people joining. Great stuff. Thank you all again for joining. Session 4. So we'll hop in, and just before we get started, I thought I'll just give a couple of tips. This is really important when it comes to editing in Lightroom. Whether you're busy in the light panel or the color panel, there's a couple of things you need to keep in mind. So the very first thing is, especially when we're editing for a creative look or for a mood or something where we're going for a specific feeling in an image that we might not have been able to capture in camera, but we want to help it along to get a more moody image, or portray it maybe as more bright or happy or more dark and moody. Whatever way we're trying to go, maybe we're trying to make a photo look more like a nighttime shot, even though it might not have been shot as late. We can do all these sort of things when we combine the light panel and the color panel. But before you hop into any edits, a really important thing to consider is the device you're editing on and the screen you're editing on. So a little tip there is, well, first off, some monitors the colors are off, the brightness might not be correct, and so you'd be editing along using a nice monitor on your desk. You've done all your edits, and afterwards you look on your phone, for instance, and you see something looks very different. Either the image is brighter or darker, or the colors look different. It might be cooler or warmer, and that could be a sign of a monitor that's not accurate or not calibrated. One thing that you might need to keep in mind is a lot of new monitors have different profiles, so you can set it for maybe gaming, working on documents. You can set it for watching movies, and all these profiles will render the blacks and the colors very differently, and they also might influence the brightness. So If you're worried about your monitor, what I found personally is, especially when it comes to Apple devices, the built-in monitors are generally very close to being color perfect and calibrated from factory. I've used color calibration electronic devices before on Apple devices, and they've always been really close, even just from factory. So, and a lot of mobile phones I've also found to be very close to perfect, straight from factory. So what I would suggest is just compare what you see on your phone or on your iPad or on your Mac to what you're seeing on the external monitor. I've got one external monitor here and I know it's off, so I generally don't do any edits on it. I use it for extra documents and maybe email and all the other things, but I make sure that I'm doing my primary photo edits on one of the monitors or screens that I actually trust. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing is, a lot of modern devices these days have something, it's a night mode or whatever they call it. There's different names for it, but basically what it is some research has shown that blue tones in screens, so blue light, keeps us awake. It's very similar to daylight, and our bodies need to stop seeing blue light to sort of slow down in the evening, get tired, and so we can get good rest. Now, that's a really good thing with the new devices. A lot of them by default will have that mode enabled. So as soon as the sun sets, your device screen might go a bit more orange. You might not even notice this, but it's basically filtering out blue tones. So it's trying not to output any blues, or it reduces blues. So basically your screen goes more orangey. If you've got a device that does that and you will be editing on it, just make sure you're either editing during the day or you switch that mode off. It will influence your white balance. So you might be looking at an image, seeing that it's a little bit orangey, you're correcting that white balance, and the next day when you look at the same image, it's very blue. So just keep that in mind. A lot of devices will have that where at night they reduce blues, and you don't want to be editing on a screen that's doing that. It's generally just a setting that you can switch off. So that's something to keep in mind if you do have a modern device that does that. So basically, what we're saying is we need to have a screen that we trust. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect, but we at least need to know that it's quite close to what it will look like on other people's devices. We need to make sure that we're not in one of those sort of night modes that reduce the blues when we're editing at night. That's the second tip. And the last one about screens is, I found that the screens are most accurate and you get your best edits that look the best on other devices when you share it as well and people open it up on social media. If you are in a room with normal lights, so not like a really bright room, not a really dark room, just a room normally lit up, and then you go into your device settings and you adjust your brightness to 50%. Nice and halfway. If it's got a slider or whatever on your phone or iPad or on your laptop, just go halfway. Generally, for most screens, if you go halfway and the room light is like a normal room, like a study or a lounge or something with normal lights, you'll find that your edits will be pretty accurate. If you're editing and you've got a mobile device, just make sure you're not in direct sunlight or outside or in a very bright environment, because that will also influence your edits. Screens look darker when you're in very bright light conditions, and screens look very bright if you're in a dark environment. So if it's at night and all the lights are off and you're editing, your screen will appear very bright, and you might adjust your exposure down to compensate for that. Everything looks good. The next day the sun is up, you're looking at your image, and now you've compensated the wrong way. So just keep these things in mind. We don't want to be re-editing images or posting images even to wherever it's going, social media or websites or something, and then afterwards seeing that we made a mistake because our screen brightness might have been all the way up or down. So these things, it's really important. And again, if you've got any questions, if you just joined, you're welcome to pop any questions in the chat. So that's a couple of tips. And then just the last notes of caution. When it comes to editing in Lightroom, especially when it comes to colors, and especially when it comes to the color panel and the things we can adjust there, most often you want to do slight increases and decreases in those sliders. Less is more when it comes to color editing. We don't want to overdo color edits. It very quickly looks completely unrealistic if we overdo, especially in the color panel, any of those edits. So just a word of caution. And one tip on doing edits when it comes to color and tones and things is edit it the way you like it. Go for the mood you want, then leave it. Go for a walk, come back to the image, or leave it overnight, look at it again the next day. What we want to actually do is just get fresh eyes, because while we're editing it, something might look good and you're just increasing colors and it's looking amazing and everything is bright and colorful. But coming back the next day, you might look at it and think, whoa, that's a bit much. Nothing in real life looks like that. Maybe we should just tone it back a bit. And very often what I find is if I do adjust things like colors, I go one way, and then when I re-look at it, I very often bring it back to about halfway of where I thought was a good place, just to not get those unicorn colorful images that that's completely unrealistic. Now, if that's the look you're going for, if it's an artistic look, if you really want colors to go to really pop off the screen, that might be an artistic choice, and that's definitely valid. But know that you're making that choice, and so the idea is, before you start editing an image, have an idea in your mind of what you want it to look like and what you want that image to do. What mood does it need to portray? Where is it going? Does it need somebody to stop scrolling in social media? Does it need to be that powerful? Is it going in a book? Is it just for yourself? Know why you're doing it and have a good idea of the edit you're going towards even before you start editing. In that way, we're doing things in Lightroom and adjusting things to a specific outcome. We're not just moving sliders around until something looks nice. I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. Everybody still happy? Just give me a happy in the chat if everybody is still there, and we can carry on to the next section. So we're getting ready to hop into some edits. Yep, happy. Great stuff. We're going. Thanks, Ryan. Happy to see you here. Okay. So let's hop into some edits. I'm going to do it a little bit differently today, just to show you one of the advantages of Lightroom. Because it works on mobile devices, I'm going to use my iPad for today's edit, just to show you that everything is still there. Some things might be in different places, but we can do everything we need to do on mobile devices, even mobile phones. That's the really nice thing. And all these edits will sync through to my Adobe Cloud library, and I will have it on all my devices as well. So it's a very convenient way of editing. Let me get my iPad up. There we go. So in short, we're going to look at the color panel. We're going to quickly look at what it does, what the different sliders do. Then we've got 3 quick edits I'm going to be doing on my iPad. And it might be a tiny bit weird because I've got a mouse connected to my iPad just to be able to point things out, because you won't be able to see where I tap with my Apple Pencil. So any stylus or tablet or something is quite handy, because you can use a stylus with it and you can edit on the actual photos, which is actually quite nice. So for me, I like editing on a mobile device when I'm doing one image at a time, and when I'm especially doing some local adjustments. So if I'm masking, if I'm painting in, if I'm dodging and burning, it's really handy being able to actually do it on the actual image and not be disconnected with a mouse or a trackpad or something like on a laptop. What I do prefer the laptop for is if I'm doing bulk edits and major adjustments on images. So if I'm adjusting things like exposure and maybe color profiles and things, and I need to do it on 500 images, the laptop is definitely the place I go. It's just more powerful and it's nice and easy to do those sort of things, creating presets, copying presets to other images. These sort of things just for me generally work better on a laptop. Also going through a lot of images quickly and selecting the ones that are the ones I want to keep. That's definitely for me faster on a laptop, because I can use the keyboard and mark the picks and the rejects and things very quickly on the laptop. like I said, editing single images, I quite like working on a tablet just because I can actually work on the actual photo. It feels like I'm working on the image. We've got a quick question. How good are spiders to calibrate screens? Yes, they are. None of the screen calibration software combined with those hardware devices, those little pucks that you stick on the screen. Personally, I don't think any of them are 100% accurate. Also, if you are calibrating your printer, if you're printing a lot of photos, you want to do color calibration on your printer. Whether it's the screen or the printer, I think nothing is 100% accurate, and you sort of need to judge yourself also what things are looking like. And also you have to remember, if you're sharing, for instance, on social media or online, not everybody watching or viewing your image has got calibrated monitors. So you have to keep that in mind. We can just get as close as we can. We can do what we can to get it as accurate as possible image. When we're doing things like printing books, we can obviously take it a few steps further. We've got more control. But when different people are viewing your images on different devices, like I said, we haven't got that much control. So we can just do our best and try and get as accurate as possible. So these things like the spiders and color calibration devices that you can plug in and calibrate your monitor, I do think they are quite useful, especially if you've got an external monitor. I found them to be really good to calibrate external monitors, which are very often quite far from what they should be. You can get them calibrated, but from factory they generally are pretty poor. Yeah, if you trust your device, if you trust your device manufacturer, like if you've got something maybe like an iPad or a Mac, you would find like a lot of these color calibration things like the spiders don't do much. The tweaks are tiny little tweaks that you almost can't see, but yeah, they're good. They're good. It depends on the use case. I also think, if I understand correctly, there's a couple of places maybe locally in South Africa that might rent out those spiders and things. So like you would rent out or go and rent a lens or a camera body or something for a specific shoot, you might be able to, from 1 or 2 places in the country, rent one of those color calibration things, because they are expensive and you pretty much have to do it once and then it's done. So yeah, that's definitely something to look at. So if you're worried about a monitor, something like that will help. There's also some other software that you can sometimes run on the Macs. I know I had one where you have to look at it and answer little questions about which block does something and whatever, and at the end of it, it sort of also calibrates, but that's based on what you can see with your eye. So that's less accurate, but maybe sometimes also a little bit useful just to get in the right ballpark with an external monitor maybe. So, but just know that our monitors can be off. Try and get yours as accurate as possible, and also know that people viewing your images, their monitors can be off, so or screens could be off. Okay, I hope that answers your question. Let's have a quick look at the color panel. So I've got my little Macbeth Colorchecker chart again here. That's available for free on Wikipedia if you do want one of these. It's nice to play around in Lightroom or other editing software and just see what different sliders do, because you've got all these little blocks. We've got all these different monochrome blocks. So from white we go all the way to almost black, and the border is actually black. So we've got all these midtones right here in the middle, which is quite nice. We've got all the different colors here represented. We've got sort of water-like colors here, foliage-like colors here, and the very first 2 are supposed to be quite nice for checking skin tones. So if you're adjusting things in the color panel and you want to know what it's going to do in skin tones, you can watch these first 2 little blocks. So this is a bit of a lighter skin tone. This is a bit of a darker skin tone, so you can get an idea of what's happening or what's going to happen potentially when you're editing images. Okay. Let me just park the mouse here on the side where it's not going to interrupt us. And I'm going to be using my pencil. I'm just opening up the color panel. So you can see there on the right, the very first panel at the top is the light panel. That's what we did in the previous session. In this session, we're going to be looking at the color panel. The very first slider that you can see there with a little round dot on it is called Temp. And when you're adjusting white balance, we all know white balance you can set in your camera. You can also do auto white balance. If you're shooting raw images, it's not baked in, so you can still adjust that afterwards. If you're shooting JPEGs, your white balance is baked in, but you can still have some leeway of adjusting things if something went wrong in Lightroom, even on a JPEG where the white balance is baked in. If you're shooting JPEGs, try to get your white balance as accurate as possible. If you're shooting raw, you can get away with it. If you see something is weird, you can always go and fix it afterwards. But it's nice having an accurate white balance because things coming into Lightroom, as you can see on this panel right here, it says as shot. So right now Lightroom is just bringing it in, and whatever the white balance of my camera was set at, that's what it's coming in as. And generally that's a good place to start. So let's have a look at that temp. Oh, and if you're adjusting white balance in your camera or in Lightroom, there's actually the first two sliders in this color panel is what constitutes white balance. So it's the balance between the warmer and the cooler side. That's the first one. And then the tint as well. So you get purple on the one side and green on the other side. So together those two will give you whatever the white balance is. So the lights in the room, the sun outside, the shade, the reflection of a wall, whatever is happening with your light that's actually falling on your subject when you're taking the image could have different tints or levels of warm or coldness, and that's what we will be adjusting or fixing if we need to with those first two sliders. There's one other very handy little tool that we're going to be using as soon as we do our little 3 quick edits. It's this little picker here. So we can pick something that is of a neutral color. If there's something in our image that's neutral, like a gray or a mid-gray sort of color, even something more white, something more black, we'd be able to pick from that. And if there's a tint or a cast to that, Lightroom will adjust for that. It will adjust the temperature and the tint sliders for us. And what will happen is it will balance out whatever that issue with the white balance is just by picking something neutral. So you'll see a lot of photographers, especially in studio, they would have gray cards for doing color tints and things. So they would do a shot of the gray card and then use that little picker on the gray card to then do the white balance. So that's a nice little thing, but very often in most images you'll find something somewhere in the image that's close enough to a neutral color that you can sample from that, a white wall, anything like that, and then you'd be able to fix your white balance if there was any issues. The other thing there at the top is there's a little drop down. So you can see we've got as shot, we've got auto, we've got custom. And what we can also do, this is a JPEG, but if it was a raw image, let me just go to the next one. This is a raw image. You'll see that I can also do daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten, fluorescent, flash. So if I'm shooting with a flash, maybe in studio, then obviously I just pick flash because a flash is very, it's a very white sort of light, and then our white balance will match with what comes from like a studio flash or even a pop-up flash or a flash on your camera. They're pretty close to being all the same. Also pretty close to daylight out in the sun. Cloudy days, it changes the white balance a little bit. Shade changes it. Tungsten and fluorescent lights can be very different. The one is much more yellow cast to it. So if you're taking images indoors and you see that they're all yellow or all blue, then switching from tungsten to fluorescent or the other way might fix that for you. So all these little things, they're built into Lightroom. We're going back to this JPEG. So that one where we can go auto, custom, or as shot is quite nice. So we can adjust things there, or go for one of the, let's just go back and have a look at these. So all these presets, they basically just a value in Kelvin, which is how the white balance is measured. And it will set a preset Kelvin value for you to get to the right white balance. Also, you can use some of these creatively. So if you change the white balance a tiny bit, especially in the Kelvin values, you could go a little bit warmer or a little bit colder than it actually was in the image, just for creative effect or mood. Okay, let's go back to this and just have a look at what these first two sliders do. So sliding the temperature slider to the right, you'll see everything in the image go warmer or more orangey, and all the colors are now looking a lot more warm or orange once I've slid this temperature slider to the right. Going the opposite way, it's going to go colder, it's going to go bluer, and you'll see a lot of these colored blocks just turning blue. Okay, so if you do have an image and it's looking very blue, people's skin tones are looking very blue, you would be needing to slide this slider to the right to get a warmer image to try and fix that. And the opposite is true. If people are looking very orangey or very yellow, then going the other way towards the blue will then fix that for you. And a very similar thing with the next slider, the tint. So one side is very purple, and going the other side to the greens, the other side is very green. So if people are looking a bit green, let's say you were shooting in a forest, for instance, and you had a person in the forest, you would very often see that because of the reflected light from the foliage and the trees and the grass maybe, people will look green because the green is reflected, the light reflects. And then you will just grab the slider and move it across to the purple to get that green cast away from the skin tones, for instance. So these first two are fixing white balance issues and different casts that you might get in your shot. We'll also see in one of the edits we're going to do, you can also use this for creative effect. You can on purpose put a cast or a specific look to an image if you've got an artistic idea of what you want to be doing with that. Okay. The very next slider is something that hasn't been in Lightroom that long. I can still remember a time when Lightroom didn't have a vibrant slider. It only had a saturation slider. So what I'm going to be doing is we're going to start with saturation and just talk about that, and then go back to vibrance, because it's very similar, but there's some key differences to what the vibrance does. So saturation, it does exactly what it says. It's the saturation of the colors. So if you want colors to be more saturated, so be more of that actual color, we just slide it to the right, and all the colors you will see gets more saturated, and they sort of start to look really, the image gets to be really colorful, up to a point where it starts, if it's in images that you actually took and it's your images and it's realistic images, it starts to look completely unrealistic when you go too far with saturation, because all the colors will just look really unrealistic. And also especially skin tones, they don't do too well if you just up your saturation. So again, moderation is usually key, like staying close to the center with sliders like saturation is generally where you want to be, and just do small moves with this, except if you've got a very good reason for on purpose doing something like this. Then saturation to the left. If we're going all the way to the left, you'll see that the colors start to decrease. So let's say around about here, it gets to be sort of like a pastel color, so a bit more of a faded look. Maybe if you're going for a bit of a film look, old like 35mm film look, some of those images, printed images, old photos would have a bit of a faded look to them. And this is how you could do that. So this decreases the intensity or the saturation of colors. So it first goes sort of towards the pastel, and then if you keep going all the way, you take all the color out. So right now it's all monochrome. So just dropping your saturation slider will get you a monochrome image as well. There are a few different ways in Lightroom to get to a black and white or a monochrome image. This might not be the best way, but it does take all the colors from your image, and we can slowly start introducing them again. You'll see sort of pastel colors come back in. If you want a bit of a pastel look, that's where you want to be. And as we keep going, eventually we'll get to the very neon highlighter sort of colors. If you're going for something like that, that's where we go. So that's saturation. And basically what saturation does is it does that adjustment to the colors, to all the colors in your image. So if you're dropping saturation to a quarter, all the colors, everything in your image is going to be dropping by that amount, by 25% or 50% or 100% if you're going no colors. If you're going the other way, saturation will do the same thing. So it will boost all colors in your image. Doesn't matter what it is, it will just push all of them the same amount towards being fully saturated. Then the Vibrance slider, this is quite a nice slider that I think is a little bit more useful when it comes to photo editing, especially with portraits, landscapes as well. I think Vibrance is quite nice. So what Vibrance does is it's sort of a more clever version of saturation. There's some really nice formulas built into it. Lightroom or Adobe has done a lot of research on especially this Vibrance slider and how it works and how it affects images. So basically what it's trying to do, if a color is really saturated already, so let's say you've got a landscape image but there's somebody with a red jacket right in the center of your landscape image. If you're moving your saturation around, the rest of your image has got muted colors, and you change the saturation, that bright red jacket is going to go way too bright before you actually introduce nice colors into the rest of your landscape, for instance, because it adjusts everything together. Whereas Vibrance will try and adjust colors that are less saturated first and boost them more than more saturated colors. So if something is already very saturated, like a red jacket in a shot, it will adjust that less and try to boost other colors in your shot more, if that makes sense. So it's giving you more saturation in areas that's already less saturated, and trying not to adjust as much on the areas that are already very saturated. So it's a bit more of a clever saturation that works quite well. The other thing that they did a lot of research on, and that they spent a lot of time on when they designed this slider, is especially around the middle, if you're not going towards the extremes, it tries to keep your skin tones as natural as possible. So you'll find that sliding your Vibrance might make a red jacket pop, but it won't get your skin tones to look really off. So the saturation slider might make people completely red in the face or something if you just up the saturation. Where if you do slight adjustments, especially around the center with Vibrance, you'll find that skin tones generally stay intact, and that it will adjust other things in the image more. So that's quite a good use for Vibrance. If you just want to introduce a little bit more color or take a little bit of color away, but you don't want to mess up skin tones, that's a good slider to use. And the nice thing to keep in mind is, because we've got these two sliders that work differently, we can use them together. So for instance, I could drop my saturation to get less color in the complete image, and then up my Vibrance to get the colors in the rest of the image and not in the person's skin tones to be very bright. I could go the opposite way as well if I need to fix things in an image. So the nice thing is, because we've got the two sliders, very often it's a good idea to use both of them in opposite directions. So dropping saturation and upping Vibrance is something that I find myself doing quite often, just because I do a lot of portraits. But yeah, especially with sometimes you've got an issue with skin tones. You've got skin tones in a portrait that's just it's not looking great, and so you might find like red areas in somebody's skin tone, and you just want to get rid of those like red areas specifically in their face. So you could drop saturation, that just drops the color in your whole image, and then up your Vibrance again, and you'll very often find that it fixes little issues like that if it's not too bad. Yeah, so very handy having these two sliders and actually knowing what they do. And like I said, moving them in opposite directions is very often a nice thing to do. Great, let me quickly check if we've got questions. Looking good still. Great, 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 great. Then inside this color panel, we've got two little buttons here at the bottom. The one says color mix and the other says color grading. We'll have a quick look at those, and then we'll do 3 example edits very quickly. So color mix, it's a very handy little thing we've got here. if we look at the color mix, what it shows us is we've got these dots with different colors. Let me see where my mouse is, if I can find it. Here it is. So we've got these colored dots. They represent different colors. And if we want a specific tone or hue of color, we can also use this picker and pick a color in our image. We're not going to do that right now, but it is a possibility to pick a specific color if it's something that we want to adjust. But basically this rainbow of dots in the bottom, you'll be able to get to all the different colors in your image. So we can select a color and then basically adjust that color. So if I select, let's do blue. So I selected the blue in that little row of colored dots. And now I've got 3 sliders below it. Hue means I'm adjusting the actual color of moving it to a different color. So generally, if you look at where my dot for the blue is, right here, if I adjust the hue, I can push that color towards the one next to it on this side. If I drop it, if I go the other way, it's going to go towards this one. So I can make my blues a bit more teal, or I can make my blues a bit more purple. And that's what this first slider will do. It will move it either this way or that way. So if I've got a blue swimming pool and I want it to look maybe a little bit more teal in my image, I will just take this slider and move it to the left. And you'll see in my color checker, if I'm right in the middle, all the blues are still blue. If I start moving it left, you'll see all the blues in my color checker chart start moving towards teal, and they're looking very teal at this stage. Okay, let's pop it back. If I go the opposite way, you'll start seeing them turning purple. There we go. So a nice pushing towards the magenta side. The next slider below it is saturation. So just as we could do saturation over all the colors with the sliders at the top, we can do saturation of individual colors. So if there's one red car parked in the back of your image and everything else in the image are greens and blues, you're outdoor, it's in nature, but there's just a little bit of a car sticking out in the back that you don't want, you can always select reds and drop the saturation a bit so that it just starts blending in a little bit more in your image. I know we can fix these things in Photoshop, but very often there's quick fixes in Lightroom that's a lot faster to do, and it just something that might catch your eye, a Coke can in the background on the sidewalk or something. Very often you don't have to remove it. You can just make it a little bit less red and it just starts to fade into the background. And little tweaks like that, very often it looks very natural, takes less time, and it's easy tweaks to do to an image if you need to fix something that's a little bit distracting just because of the color or the intensity of the color. So let's look at saturation. As I pull it left, you'll see my blue blocks go gray. So it's pulling out the color. And as we go right, you'll see my blue blocks going more towards a neon blue. Okay, so that's saturation of only that one color. Let's take a red here. You'll see the same thing. I'm dropping the reds to gray and I'm pushing them up to be very red. Okay, back to less red, and double tapping on one of these little round things on the sliders will always put it back to the default setting it was, which is quite handy to know. And then luminance. Luminance is how bright something is. So if you're talking about luminance of a light, the more light it emits, the higher the luminance. Similar to this, so you can adjust luminance of specific colors. So very similar to what we did in the previous session where we adjusted exposure. This is very similar to thinking about it as the exposure of a specific color. So if you've got that blue swimming pool that we talked about, if you want to lighten it up and make it look more brighter, then you could slide this luminance to the right. You'll see my blues get lighter, and if I move it left, you'll see them get darker. So more intense, deep blues as I go left. So that's a nice, if you've got somebody in that classic shot with somebody with a red jacket out in nature somewhere, you can do maybe something like drop the luminance to get it more of a darker red. You can increase the saturation maybe a tiny bit to have the red more intense. And if you really want to, you can move the hue around a bit and change the actual color of that red. So that's a really handy thing to know. And if you're going for super artistic looks and moods, this is a handy thing to know, where you can change things like your greens, where there's foliage and things. You can change greens to be more blue, you can change them to be more yellow, all these little things. You can push colors to be different colors. What you can also do is you can reduce your color palette by using this tool. So if there's just a lot of colors in an image, you can reduce some of them, you can desaturate some of them, you can move some of them to be a little bit of a different color, and just have a simpler color palette to have a more simple image, which I find very often is quite nice, not having something that's too distracting and bright, except if that's the actual image, if it's about being very colorful. But very often images end up being colorful, but the subject is then not noticed as much. So it's nice sometimes reducing your color palette a little bit if possible. Okay. By the way, that's something they do in movies very often when they build the sets, when they pick the costumes, when they everything in movie sets, they actually think about the color palette, and they've got reduced color palettes when they're shooting movies. So it's just less distracting, and so it's something to keep in mind. Sometimes you can put the focus on the subject where you want it by having a few less colors, which is quite nice. Okay, we'll jump into the next little thing that we can do, and I'm closing the color mix, and I am opening the next little button there that says color grading. So this has changed also in the last few months in Lightroom. We used to have only 2 of these circles. So right now we've got 3, which works very similar to something like Adobe Premiere Pro when they do video color grading, when they do color grading for movies. They've got a tool that looks like this. Previously in Lightroom we only had shadows and highlights, and we could change the color or the hue of one of the 2. Now the nice thing with Lightroom is we've got the third one, so we've got midtones as well. So we can change shadow areas, darker areas, we can change midtones, and we can also change highlight areas, which is quite nice. Okay, so you see the 3 little dots at the top. Let me find my mouse again and just point it out for you. So we've got this dot, which is our shadow dot, this one for midtones, this one for highlights, and we've also got one for overall. Generally you'd use your light panel or your basic panel to adjust your overall, also your color panel. So this one you might not use that often, but these 3 you can use for creative effect quite nicely. Also sometimes for fixing some issues in images. And we'll see now when we do our edits, it's going to be quite handy. A handy place to get a creative look in an image or fix something that went wrong. Okay, so the first dot, if I click on it, now I'm in shadows, and it says shadows right below that multicolored disk I've got. If I click on the middle one, it will say midtones just below that multicolored disk I've got. And then the last one, if I click on it, it says highlights. So basically what this allows you to do is to adjust either the shadow areas, the midtones, or the highlight areas, and you're basically adjusting the color in those areas. So if I've got some shadows in my image, and I want the shadows to be very cold and a little bit more ominous, maybe I could put some, I'm moving the little dot that used to be in the middle. In the middle it does nothing. If I move it towards a color, it's going to be introducing that color in different areas of my image. So if you watch the bottom right little block, when it's in the middle, my bottom right block is a very dark gray. So that's a shadow sort of area. As I move it towards the blues, I'm introducing more blue into that block. So right now, you should be able to see that that bottom right-hand block that used to be dark gray is now a dark blue. So I've introduced some color into the shadow area, but it left my midtones and my highlights to be what they used to be. Okay, so you'll see the blocks towards the lower left, the white block and the almost white block, they're still white and there's no blue introduced in those. So it doesn't do a complete color cast like we did with the temperature slider on the whole image. It just adjusts either the shadows or the midtones or the highlights. So that's a nice handy thing to do. So let's do something that you would very often find in the movies. They might push the shadows towards blue. So you'll see that bottom right hand gray block is now blue again. And what they might do is in the highlights, we're going towards highlights, they might make it quite a bit warmer. So you'll see the two blocks on the lower left start to look a little bit more orangey if I do this. So this would introduce some color in the highlight areas. And we've got some control over that. The slider is just below. You'll see there's a U slider. So if I slide that around, you'll see it slides the little dot around the disc at the top. So you can do it either at the top or with the slider at the bottom. Does exactly the same thing. If I slide the saturation slider at the bottom towards the left, you'll see it go towards the center. So this is how much of that color you're introducing in that area. So in this case, if I slide it all the way to the center or to the left in the slider, it's not introducing any color. And as I slide it right, you'll see that little dot move on the disc towards the outer side of that disc. And it also starts introducing more and more of that color that I picked. And then luminance is again the same. You can make areas darker or brighter by sliding the luminance slider on this side. Okay. The blending and balance is just how these three different areas move from one area to the others. So it just basically tells Adobe where your shadows start, where your midtones start, and where your highlights start. And generally the defaults in blending and balance should be good, and you could just leave that for most images, because midtones would be the middle part of your histogram, highlights would be the brighter part of your histogram, the right hand part if you're looking at your histogram, and the shadows is the left hand or the darker parts of your histogram. Moving those balances, the blending and the balances just moves where they go from one to the other one, and also how fast they transition. So but like I said, generally you would leave those at where they are. Okay, I'm going to reset these little things. That's midtones, and again double tapping on that disk just puts it back to default. So that's the color grading. It's quite nice to use. We'll use it now when we do our edit. Any questions at this stage? So this ends our little color panel. Oh, one last thing with color. You see the little B&W button right at the top. If we press it, we get black and white. And if we press it again, we get the colors back. So that's another way. And like I said, there's quite a few different ways of getting to a black and white or monochrome image, but just pressing that button is another way to do it. You can also change your color profile right at the top to something like Adobe Monochrome or any other profile that is monochrome. There's different ones available. Okay, you can also use presets to go to black and white, but we're not doing that today. We're working with color. Any other questions? Are we still good to go? Then we're going to hop into some example edits. Let's do this first. If you followed some of my previous sessions, you know that one game that I like to play with myself and with my editing, and that I think increases my capacity to fix images and makes me understand all the tools in Lightroom a lot better, is to try and match edits. So I would generally not do this at all for commercial work. I would not do this even for my personal work, because I like what I like and the looks that I like, and I would edit for a specific mood or for clarity or whatever for a client or myself. But doing these very creative, very different edits and trying to match things like maybe a poster that I saw somewhere, or a magazine cover that looks like really different, or maybe I watch a series and the colors and the look of it is they're just very different, and I might pause a frame and try to match something like that. I might see a movie poster or a specific movie, and like previously we did one from Dune, and we tried to match the mood and the feel of something. So I'm not trying to exactly match the edit somebody else did, but I'm trying to get to the same feel, to the same mood, trying to see what they did, trying to figure out what they did, because I think the more I do this, the better I get with editing, the more tools in my arsenal for fixing images or getting to a specific look. If somebody specifically needs something and they tell me they're going for a specific mood or a specific look, then I know how to get there. I've done it before. So that's just my thinking about playing around with Lightroom. So very often these sort of edits that I do and these sort of games that I play and seeing what I can do and how far I can push an image will become quite unrealistic for one. They won't be something that I would generally be sharing somewhere. But I think just going through that exercise makes me better in editing and understanding the tools a lot better. So pushing some of these tools to the extremes, I think, teaches me a lot of these, how they work and how far I can actually push them before things start going pear-shaped. So with that in mind, we're going to do that same little game on the first two images, and we're going to be looking at a series on Netflix. And if you haven't seen it, you can also just do an image search in Google to see a couple of still frames and the movie posters. The series is called Ozark. Ozark is whatever the people's opinions on the series, whether it's good or not. The main thing is it's got a very specific look to it. I've rarely seen any series or movie with a look that's this moody and creative, and almost like as a photographer you would look at something like this and say, this is terrible. The sky is not the right color, the people's skin tones are not the right color. It's how do they do this? It's looking terrible. But if you watch the series, it's all about the mood. It's all about the way they portray this area. The Ozarks it's like sort of central USA. There's lakes and forests around, and it's all based on this mood that they want to get out. The movie poster, this one is a lot more edited, heavily edited for like sort of artistic mood. The actual scenes in the series are a little bit less edited than this, but still very, very you can recognize them very easily and look at the mood of these images. So let's look at a couple. This is an indoor scene, for instance. You'll see the greens, the moodiness to this image. This is the movie poster. You'll again see blues, greens, very moody. This is an outdoor scene. Again, darker, bluer, greener, very moody sort of scene as well. So those are our three reference images, and a quick way for me just to figure out what they did and what it would have looked like when they actually shot this. So with images like this or color grading in movies like this, they generally shoot in pretty standard profiles or sort of the equivalent of raw profiles, maybe log profiles in the movie side. But generally when they get this into the editing room, it looks pretty normal. So we should be able to get this back to looking normal and then figure out what they did to get it looking this way. We just do the reverse. So the first thing I'm going to do is just look at the color panel, take the color picker here where it says white balance. There's a little color picker. I'm clicking on it a couple of times so you can see it. So that little color picker just below the black and white button, we can sample from the image, and if we sample something that I think should be neutral, like this back wall, we might be able to get this image looking closer to normal. I'm just moving it around to a few different places where I can maybe find something that should be neutral. I think this back wall sort of works best. I'm going to take that for my white balance. Now on a mobile device you can hold your finger on the editing side, so just next to the photo or even on the image, and it will show you the original imported image, and if you lift your finger then you'll see it goes back to my edit. If you're editing on your laptop or PC, backslash will do the same. So as you toggle backslash, you can see the original image and you can see your edited one. So in this case, what's happened with just that one white balance change is you'll see the skin tones of this lady in the middle is already looking a lot more normal and orangey. We're seeing some like normal reds and other colors come through as well. The set I think isn't that colorful, but Looking at the original here, that's very green. And going back to the other one where we selected the white balance picker on the back wall, this is looking a lot closer to what we would expect an image from camera would look. It still looks a little bit contrasty and it looks a little bit dark, but we can reverse engineer that. So we would take our normal photo, make it a little bit darker, increase a bit of contrast, then we'll have something like this. And then looking at our temperature slider, you'll see here on the temperature slider, it went to +20 on the temperature and it went to +30 on the tint. And it did those two based on me picking the back wall for the white balance, which means what they did to the normal image is they went the opposite way. So they went -20 towards the blue side on their temperature from the original image, and they went -30 on towards the green side to get that green look. So they put a lot of green into it, is in actual fact what's happening. So if we want to reverse engineer, we just go the other side with those sliders. So we're just getting a feel for what they might have done in this case. I'm just going to do two more things. I'm just going to lift the exposure a tiny bit because I think they dropped the exposure quite a bit, maybe a stop if I look at this. So I'm going plus pretty much a stop to get it to look well exposed, I think. And I'm going to drop the contrast maybe to there, roughly -20. And now I get a good idea of what they did. So I just have to go to my image and do the opposite. Because I sort of fixed their image back to what I would expect almost from my camera. And now I can get a similar look and feel and mood in my own image if I just do the opposite. Okay. Similarly with this one, if I just do the one thing, I'm just double checking the colors between the three. I'm getting my white balance picker again. I'm just picking his jacket here. So I can see it's already looking better. So from the original very blue image, blues and greens, now there's some more oranges and some more warm tones in. They did a lot more work on this one. It's still not where it should be, where I would expect a normal photo to look like. But you'd see they did a similar thing there. Because it's the poster, I'm not going to worry too much about this one. I want to rather match the mood of the actual series. So this is the last one, and then we'll quickly do the edits in the other one. So I'm just picking this strap on the backpack. So I've got a feeling that strap was sort of a grayish color. So this is what I get. Very muted colors and a much more normal shot when I'm looking at the more orangey skin tones. And we can again see what they did. They moved the temperature slider obviously towards the blue in this case. There's still a lot of green, so I'm going to just move the purple, the tint slider over to purple. And that's looking more natural to me. So if I move the purple towards purple on this one, and also towards the temperature towards the warm side. So very similar to what we saw in that very first image. We're going +20 or 30 on the temperature slider and +30 or 40 on the tint slider to get back to what looks a lot more normal. So if I'm trying to apply this to my image that's already looking normal, I need to go the other way. Okay. Hope that makes sense. Let's get into an edit. So Roger might recognize this one. That was a really great photo walk. I enjoyed it a lot with Roger. I shot this in black and white. Just seeing this little bridge, Roger will know it well. It's close to, well, I guess they go to this area often from what I understood. So this little bridge, it just looked moody. There's some trees there. It looked like a moody thing. And I just set my camera to monochrome just to remind myself that I thought this might make a good monochrome image. But after watching a couple of episodes of that Ozark series, I thought this is a good image to try that edit on. So let's go. I'm switching off the black and white, so I'm going back to my raw image. This was a raw saved. And this is looking maybe a bit too bright and cheerful for the mood I'm going for. And also trying to match that Ozark sort of look. We want to get some of these natural wood tones to go more towards the blues and the greens. Okay, very first thing I'm going to do, and we're going to do a very quick edit. You could spend a lot of time trying to finesse little things in this, but we're going to go as fast as we can, not to waste people's time. First thing, I'm just straightening up the image. I had my camera a bit of a slant. I very often do this, and it's always towards the left for some reason, but that should fix that. Now we remember what we saw. Going maybe a tiny bit down in exposure might help a bit, because we saw that from a lot of those images, they were on the darker side. They definitely increased contrast on most of the two images that I had a detailed look on. So that gives a bit more mood to it. You'll still see the color is not what we want. What I'm also going to do is just drop my highlights, because I've got a blue sky there that we didn't really have in the indoor shot or that other shot with the two people sitting outside. And I think a darker sky will actually suit this image quite well. So I dropped my highlights as well there. The shadows, maybe we can get some more detail in the shadows. I don't think it's going to make a major difference in this case. I'm not going to go very far with that slider. The whites and the blacks I'm just going to leave alone right now. They're looking good, but if I wanted to spend some time, I could do tiny adjustments there for those as well. Now we're going to color. This is where we'll see the mood completely transform in this image. So we know from what we saw is they went colder, quite a bit colder. So as I go with this slider to the left, we're getting to see something that's much more cold and bluish tint. So especially in this woodwork in the little bridge, you'll see that woodwork start going more blue. And then what we also saw is they introduced a lot of green. So I'm pushing the tint slider. So the temperature slider, I went to blue, and the next one I went to green, and we're going to go quite far. Now you'll see my green and their green is very different. We'll fix that just now. So the next slider we've got is vibrance. I'm going to decrease my vibrance a bit. I'm also going to decrease my saturation a bit. And as I decrease that green, it's starting to look a lot better. So we're getting very close to that sort of look that they did in the color grade. For the Ozark series. I think we might even have still a little bit too much color. They definitely dropped saturation when they did their edits. And if we really want to tweak things even more, we can go to our color mix and maybe look at our yellows, maybe push the yellows a little bit towards the green. We can drop the luminance of our yellows. So yellows is very often found in leaves of plants, grass as well. You'll very often find that an image with grass in it, like a lawn, there's more yellow in that lawn than green, even if it looks green to the eye. I'm dropping my saturation there. I'm dropping my luminance just to get it to be a darker green and not a bright luminous green. Going to my greens, I'm dropping my luminance again. Saturation, maybe not so much. Dropping my luminance. So we're getting very close to that sort of look that we want. The one thing that I am noticing is I've got one bright spot with some quite a bit of vibrant, almost towards the neon green there. We'll try to fix that just now. So color mix, I'm done. Color grading, this is my shadows. I'm going to put some blue into my shadows just to create a bit of mood in my shadowy areas. My midtones I might just leave right where they are. And my highlights, which would be in my sky, I'm going to just put a bit of orange in to get that sky to look a little bit less blue. Thinking that's looking pretty good. And then maybe if I really wanted to, I could put just a little radial gradient right here in this bright spot. It's a tiny bit bright for me right there. And I can go to color. I could drop the saturation maybe a tiny bit more, and I could drop the exposure a tiny bit. I think that starts matching a lot better with the mood I want. Now I could spend some more time on this. I could put some linear gradients into this, maybe just to darken the left hand side especially of this image. Looks a little bit bright with the sky and the water there. So a linear gradient might help a tiny bit. I can show you while I'm talking about it. Let me do it. So I can pop a linear gradient right there, drop the exposure a tiny bit, drop the highlights a tiny bit, because it's sort of a little distracting if there's a bright spot on an image. My eye goes there immediately. So right now I've darkened down the left hand side of this image so that the brightest spot is right down the road behind that little bridge, and I think that helps my eye go down into the image. So this is pretty much how I would do this. It's not an exact match, it's not an exact science, but it's a bit of a game for me just to see what I can do with images. And I think the more you edit, the better you get at editing, and doing things like this will also train your eye to see different casts and tints and things. So when you do look at one of your own portraits or things and you see, oh, there's a bit of purple in here that shouldn't be here, the skin tone's a little bit off, the only way to get to that point is to do a lot of edits and look at a lot of images. And that's when your eye starts to pick up on these little subtle things that that's wrong with an image. Okay, now another little trick with Lightroom that I can show you is on the mobile version, I've got these 3 dots top right hand side, right in the corner, so right below my little battery indicator. If I press those 3 dots, I get a thing that says copy settings. This is a quick way to get whatever I did in this image over to the next one, which is exactly what we're going to be doing. Now, if you're editing on your laptop or Mac, on a Mac it is Shift Command C. So normally if you just go Command C on a Mac, it's copy, so it will copy all my edits from that image, and if I go to the next image I can paste all of them. The problem with that is 2 images might be differently exposed. The one image could be a lot brighter, or you might want a specific masking on a specific place in one image. You might have cropped an image, so copying everything over to the next one will mess up your next image. The nice thing with Lightroom is you can go with Shift Command C, or on Windows it would be Shift Control C, and then it will ask you what do you want to copy. It will give you a list. So we can see it here. If I go copy, I'll get a list similar to this also on my Mac or on a PC if I'm editing. So you can selectively copy things from one image to the next. So if I only want to copy a color profile, I can do that to other images. If I only want to copy a specific color grade to the other images, but I don't want to adjust the exposure, I could do that. So this is a quite nice thing, and the little drop down at the top gives me the option of selecting everything in this list. It gives me the option of selecting modified, so now it only is selecting things that I've changed in this specific edit. Okay, I can also go default, so you can set your defaults, or none if I want to go and select something myself. What I'm going to go and do is modified, so I can quickly check what it's going to copy. It's going to copy my Adobe color profile. That's fine. The crop, I'm not going to do the crop because I straightened this image, so that's already something that I just picked up now, and I unselected crop, so I don't want to do that. The masking I did specifically for this image, so I'm not going to copy any masking. You can also open it up and it will show you the masks and you can select any of them, but I'm not going to do any masking. The light panel, I want to copy whatever I changed in the light panel. The color panel, I want to copy everything I changed in the color panel. That's looking good. So I'm going to go and select top right hand, that little check mark, and now it's copied all the settings from this one. I'm going to my next image, which was also from Roger's walk that I really enjoyed. Another image that I thought would work in black and white. It's unedited, so I would still, even in black and white, I would edit this quite a bit, but right now we're just going to be pasting this one in. So I go to the 3 little dots in the corner again, and I go paste, and there we go. So right there I've copied my color grade, everything that I did on the previous image over to this one. And generally the only adjustments I would need to make is maybe adjust things in my light panel to get stuff to look the way I would like it. And you would see immediately we get that very Ozarky green, bluish, cold, moody tint to it. So that's what makes Lightroom really powerful, is just moving edits between different images and selectively moving edits from one image to the next image. So that saves a lot of time if you're working with lots of images. We're almost getting to the end. Let's do another creative one. This is something completely different. So Let's hide the Ozark ones again. And this was this last weekend. This is just a quick one that I picked. I haven't gone through all my images from this last weekend. This was on top of the Leonardo, also with Joburg Photowalkers. Really good. Just a quick pano here. I stitched this in Lightroom as well. So in one of the future sessions, we will have a look at how to do HDR if you are interested in HDR. For things maybe like real estate photography, there's really good applications for doing HDR. So it's high dynamic range images where you stack multiple images to get more dynamic range from dark to light. We look at that. Lightroom can do it. It wasn't always in Lightroom, but it has been added. You can also do stacks with panoramas. So you can take multiple images and Lightroom can stitch them seamlessly together for you, which is exactly what I did for this image. And we'll just have a quick look, maybe something very creative and very different. So again, pushing this image in a completely different way to what I might have done just shows me what Lightroom is capable of, and it teaches me what the tools can do. So let's have a quick look at what we can do with this one. Again, I've got a slight slant on this by the looks of it. I'm just going to straighten it a little bit. I think I'm going to get it as close as possible. There's some tools in Lightroom as well. We'll do those panels still. We're getting to the geometry panels in one of the later sessions where you can use lines and things to straighten things. But for now, I'm just using the crop tool because that's the fastest way to almost get it straight. I think that's looking pretty good. I'm happy with that. I'm going to start with a light panel, maybe increase the exposure a tiny bit. And let's try and see. I'm thinking just creatively, the Joburg skyline is very iconic skyline, and maybe I wanted to go sort of, you know, those images that you sometimes see on the t-shirts or things where you just get the skyline. So I'm thinking if I sort of leave the clouds in the top, maybe enhance it a tiny bit, and the color maybe a tiny bit, finesse it a little bit, but get the bottom part and the skyline to go almost silhouette-y. That could be interesting. So we're going to be using the light panel and the color panel and see if we can get anywhere close to that idea I've got. But again, I'm starting with an idea and then I'm going to the tools to try and get there. I'm definitely going to up the contrast because that will push my dark areas darker, my light areas lighter. So that's going to help me get to go black and white on this one. I don't know. There's a bit of color there in the clouds. Maybe I'll see what the color looks like. And today we're doing the color panel. So generally, very often my first thought would be black and white. But in this case, because we're doing the color panel, I'm going to stick with color. Just as an example. So contrast, what contrast also does, just something to keep in mind. Anytime you increase your contrast, whether you do it in the contrast slider, like I'm doing now, or if you are pushing your whites towards the right and your blacks towards the left on the two bottom sliders that you can see there, or if you're using your tone curve and lifting your highlight areas and dropping your shadow areas, anytime you're basically increasing on the histogram the distance between light and dark areas, you're actually also introducing saturation. So just keep in mind that if you are increasing contrast, and you'll especially see it on something like a portrait, if you take a portrait image and you think it needs a bit of contrast and it's a color image, and you push your contrast up, you'll suddenly see skin tones and things do weird things, and it does exactly the same as what your saturation slider would do. So just something to keep in mind, if you are increasing contrast by any of the many ways you can do that in Lightroom, and colors are starting to look too neon-y and skin tones are falling apart, just go to your saturation and decrease saturation again. That would counteract that but still keep your contrast. So that's very often where people go wrong. They increase contrast but they don't decrease saturation to compensate for that effect, except if you want that. In this case, having increased the contrast, you'll see that I get a bit more color in my clouds there at the top, which is not a bad thing in this specific image, because I used a very flat natural color profile in my camera, and basically it's not like the vivid or the the landscape sort of profiles where it would capture a lot of color. There was actually more color than you'd see in this image, so I'm trying to put some of that back. I also, in my camera settings, I dropped the contrast a bit when taking this pano, so I'm looking to increase the contrast back to somewhere that looks good. Okay, then I'm going to my highlights. I'm just, and this is another little tip, just slide things around a tiny bit and see what they do. I'm thinking a tiny bit of more highlight actually helps to separate the skyline from what's happening above it. And then to do the exact same thing, I'm trying to drop or darken the areas, the skyline and below, obviously, so the foreground sort of areas. So I'm going to take my shadows and I'm going to move it left to get that whole front part to hopefully go closer to black. And I'm going to do a similar thing with my whites. I'm going to move my whites a bit towards the right. I'm going to move my blacks towards the left. And you'll see basically that whole foreground starting to go almost completely black. I think round about there is good. I can move my whites a little bit to the right again just to lighten up. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create some not only color contrast but a tone contrast between having a brighter area at the top and a darker area at the bottom. So that where those two areas meet, generally that's where your eye would go. So you're looking at that skyline. High contrast areas is something that when you look at an image that you notice immediately. I can do something else. So that was the original image. And that's where we are with the edit. And just going into the color one, we're just going to finish it up. I might just play around with the temperature so we can make it look a tiny bit more like the sunset it was. I can also put a tiny bit of vibrance in. I'm not going to put saturation in. I've already increased the contrast, so I've introduced some color. I don't want the colors to start looking completely weird on me. The clouds are already starting to look a little bit unrealistic, but for artistic effect, we're going to call it and be happy with that exact look. And I think we're getting close to something that I'm happy with. I might even push the temperature a tiny bit warmer still, increase the vibrance even the slightest bit more, not too much. Like I said, with color edits, very often less is more. And I think just stopping there would already be a good edit on this image. Later on, in later sessions, we'll look at things like sharpening. So we might want to sharpen that skyline a tiny bit just to get nice clean edges on that silhouette. There's a couple of things we can do. Local retouches, so healing. We could, you'll see, for instance, there's a bit of a distracting light right there, just left below the Ponte. So we might not want that little billboard or whatever it was, electronic signage there. So we can go with local retouching and just get rid of some of those because they are bright enough that I'm adjusting them together with the sky. They're not adjusting with my shadow area. But these are tiny little things that I might spend more time on if I really, really wanted to. But as we get to the different tools, the effects panel, the detail panel, and the local retouching and masking panels, we'll see some ways of even getting a better image in a case like this. For instance, with masking, we can isolate the sky, adjust that separately. We might just put a linear gradient on the foreground to darken that even more, to get rid of some of those lights. So there's different things we can do, but we haven't covered those tools. So I'm going to leave it here and call that my edit. I can just show you this as large as I can, all my different edits before we go. Let me get to iPad only, get you a full screen view of this. Let me move my mouse out of the way. There we go. So this is this one. That was the before. That's the after. This is this one. That's the after image. That's the before because I had it in black and white setting on my camera. This is this one. That's the after. And we'll see the black and white is the imported image again. So those are the three edits. just quick edits to get specific looks. I think that shows some of the tools that's available, especially in the color panel. Hope that helps. If there's any questions, you can pop that into the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions. Go back to my camera. There's a couple of seconds delay, so I have to wait around a couple of seconds before I see your questions. If there's anything, just pop it in the chat. Good. Everybody happy? Then we'll call it a session there. The replay will again be available. Again, there's a WhatsApp group, there's an email list, and there's meetup events that will be scheduled for future sessions. If you've got any questions, you're welcome to contact me. And that will conclude our training for today.